Welcome! Today we're covering 5 terrifying incidents where people believed they were safe inside their vehicles. From a white SUV parked beside a lion pride to a grizzly bear working through a locked vehicle door in the dead of a Wyoming night. But we started in Limpopo province, where a simple action of opening a window costs a family hangout to a horrifying nightmare. On the 9th of July 2016, the dry season had settled heavily across Limpopo province in northern South Africa. Grasslands turned yellow as dust followed vehicles through the bush, while shrinking waterholes forced wildlife closer to reserve roads. That morning, 42 years old, Vosloo drove his family into a private game reserve several hours north of Johannesburg. Once they passed the entrance gate, the paved road disappeared behind them. The route narrowed into a rough dirt track surrounded by thorn trees and dry scrub. Mobile signal faded quickly until there was nothing left except wilderness. Theron was not new to places like this. For over a decade, the Pretoria wildlife photographer had captured elephants, giraffes, and predators across multiple reserves, growing so familiar with the bush that danger had begun to feel routine. His wife, Surette, sat beside him in the front passenger seat, while their 16-year-old daughter, Namsa, and 13-year-old son, Lwazi, rode quietly in the back. Like many families on safari, they spent most of the drive scanning the bush for movement, while Theron kept his camera resting near his lap, ready at any moment. Reserve rules required closed windows near predators. Vehicles acted as protection, and for hours, the lions they passed ignored the SUV entirely, as expected. The family spotted antelope grazing beneath trees and zebras farther down the road. Occasionally, Theron slowed to photograph through the closed glass. Everything felt calm and controlled. Then, late in the morning, they found the lions. A pride of 7 rested near the road. Theron photographed them from inside the SUV, but the closed windows created a problem he had dealt with before. Reflected sunlight softened details and ruined sharp wildlife shots. In previous reserves, he had briefly rolled his window down for cleaner images and nothing bad had happened. I think that's how dangerous habits usually develop. Nothing happens until one day, something does. So after several quiet minutes of watching the lions lie still, he lowered his window fully. At first, nothing changed. The lions lay calmly, briefly lifting their heads before settling again, and the atmosphere inside the SUV seemed to relax. But 2 of the younger females, near the outer edge of the pride, had already noticed the open window. One kept her gaze fixed on the gap beside Theron. The other, positioned slightly behind and further down the road, had gone very still, in a way that was different from resting. Theron was still adjusting his camera settings when Surette suddenly grabbed his arm. The first lioness was already moving, not charging, not vocalizing, just closing the distance with calm, deliberate focus. The gap between her and the SUV disappeared frighteningly fast. Everything after that happened in seconds. She exploded upward at the open window with shocking speed, her head and upper body slamming against the side of the SUV with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. Her jaws locked onto the area between Theron's shoulder and neck, wrenching him violently against the window frame. Her claws hooked against the door panel for leverage. The camera flew from his hands and struck the dashboard. Surette screamed and grabbed at Theron's arm with both hands, while Lwazi dropped into the footwell behind them. Namsa lunged forward between the seats, trying to help. In the confusion, she grabbed the passenger side interior handle while reaching for the horn controls, accidentally pulling the latch. The passenger door swung open several inches. The second lioness had already circled to that side of the vehicle. She hit the door with her full weight, driving it wide before Surette could pull it shut. The sudden force threw Surette sideways against the open frame. She lost her footing against the seat, and her upper body swung outward through the gap. The lioness grabbed her immediately. Her jaws closed on Surette's upper chest and shoulder as her forepaws hooked against the door frame for leverage. Rather than forcing herself into the vehicle, the animal pulled using the same motion lions use to drag prey away from cover. Surette's body was wrenched further into the doorway, her torso now mostly outside the SUV, while her legs remained tangled against the seat. Namsa grabbed at her mother's legs and pulled back, screaming. The struggle in the doorway lasted only a few seconds, but the damage was already severe. Surette had sustained deep wounds to her neck and chest from the initial bite and the violent twisting force of the drag. On the driver's side, Theron was still fighting against the first lioness, blood spreading across his seat from deep wounds to his shoulder, neck, and the side of his face. His resistance was weakening. Namsa found the horn and pressed it down hard. The continuous blast cut through the chaos. The lioness on the passenger side released Surette and dropped back from the door. The animal on the driver's side released Theron and fell back onto the road. Both retreated several feet into the dirt. Namsa and Lwazi pulled Surette back inside the vehicle. She was breathing but unresponsive, bleeding heavily from her neck and chest. The pride nearby remained mostly where they were, watching but not approaching. Namsa grabbed her father's reserve radio from the center console and broadcast for emergency assistance until a response confirmed help was coming. Theron had collapsed against the driver's seat. Luwazi was physically unharmed but remained pressed into the footwell, not moving. Rescuers arrived approximately 20 minutes after the alert and airlifted the family from the reserve. Theron and Surette both died from their injuries. Namsa was treated for deep lacerations across her arms and hands and survived. Luwazi was physically unhurt. The investigation found no operational fault with the reserve. Officials noted that both lions had behaved consistently with natural predatory behavior once the vehicle barrier was compromised on two sides simultaneously. The open driver's window created the first point of vulnerability. The accidentally unlatched passenger door created the second. While Limpopo's bushveld turned deadly in seconds, southern Tanzania would show that danger did not always announce itself. Sometimes it waited beneath the waters off a flooded crossing. On the 19th of March 2014, the rainy season had already changed the roads of southern Tanzania into something dangerous. In Ruvuma region, weeks of rain flooded rivers and roads, yet local communities continued traveling despite dangerous, rising waters and disrupted crossings. Jabari Mwenda, 44, had spent years driving passengers between remote villages and district towns. His 12-seat transport van was one of the few reliable ways people moved through the area. Farmers, families, and children relied on the road for travel, and Jabari's knowledge of flood-prone routes made him a trusted guide. That morning, Jabari was returning from a family visit with his wife, Afia Mwenda, 40, their 17-year-old daughter, and their 13-year-old son. The rain had finally eased, but the rivers were still high. As they drove through the countryside, the tires pushed through wet mud while water dripped from the trees lining the road. Eventually, Jabari approached a ford he had crossed many times before. Water flowed across the road in a wide brown sheet. There were no warning signs, no barriers, and nothing that clearly suggested the crossing had become deadly overnight. From inside the vehicle, the water looked rough, but manageable. Still, something about it felt different. The fast current carried debris across the flooded crossing as Jabari carefully judged the depth, knowing detours were long and turning back could also trap them. After a moment, he carefully drove forward. At first, the crossing seemed stable. Water splashed around the tires as the vehicle crawled ahead. Zola later remembered hearing the engine strain while the current pushed against the sides of the van. Everyone inside had gone quiet. Then the vehicle suddenly jerked. The front tires had slipped into a submerged erosion channel hidden beneath the muddy water. The engine sputtered once, then stalled completely. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Water rushed around the doors while Jabari tried restarting the engine again and again. The van shook slightly as the current pressed against it. Finally, he told Afia to stay inside with the children while he stepped out to inspect the obstruction. I don't think Jabari realized he was stepping into the most dangerous part of the situation. The moment Jabari entered the water, the situation changed. The current pushed hard against his legs as he moved along the side of the vehicle. He reached toward the front tire, trying to feel what had trapped the undercarriage beneath the surface. Then the water exploded beside him. Zola heard a splash, and her father's shout before a crocodile surged from muddy water, attacking Jabari in seconds. Jabari grabbed at the side of the vehicle, trying to hold himself above the surface as the crocodile twisted backward into deeper water. The animal thrashed with terrifying force, pulling him sideways through the flooded crossing. His body slammed against the side of the van as muddy water surged around him. Inside the vehicle, the children screamed. Afia immediately opened the door despite the danger. Zola reportedly tried yelling for her mother to stay inside, but Afia was already moving into the floodwater toward her husband. The crocodile dragged Jabari farther from the vehicle. For brief moments, parts of him surfaced above the water before disappearing again beneath the violent churning current. Afia struggled forward against the flood, reaching toward him as the water rose around her waist. That was when a second surge erupted nearby. Investigators later believed either the same crocodile redirected toward Afia or another crocodile had already been in the flooded crossing area. Zola saw her mother suddenly lose balance as the water around her burst apart. Afia disappeared almost instantly beneath the surface. The entire attack lasted less than a minute. Inside the stranded vehicle, Zola grabbed her younger brother and forced him away from the doors and windows. Outside, the muddy floodwater slowly calmed again. The violent splashing stopped. The crossing returned to silence except for the sound of rushing current. Their parents were gone. For hours, the two children remained trapped inside the stalled transport, alone in the flooded ford. Every movement in the water outside terrified them. Neither child dared leave the vehicle. Later that morning, another vehicle traveling the same route discovered the stranded transport. The driver found Zola and her younger brother still inside, shaken and crying but alive. Rescue teams soon arrived and began searching the flooded river system downstream. Recovery operations continued through the day. Human remains were eventually located farther along the riverbank. Authorities later confirmed both deaths. No warning signs or crocodile monitoring existed at the crossing, while floods rapidly expanded rivers, creating hidden, dangerous predator zones. Jabari's decision seemed ordinary and experienced, but a crocodile likely waited beneath floodwater, turning the familiar crossing into a hidden trap. While Tanzanian floodwaters concealed the danger entirely, the forests of central India would show that even a visible animal, calmly watched from a stationary vehicle, could turn lethal the moment a single rule was broken. On the 11th of September 2015, a family safari trip through central India was supposed to celebrate a major milestone. After Kiran completed his environmental science degree studying wildlife behavior, his father finally fulfilled a 2-year promise to visit one of India's famous tiger reserves together. The family traveled from Chennai to a tiger reserve deep in central Madhya Pradesh, one of the most active tiger corridors in India. Devraj, 46, approached the trip carefully. He booked through licensed operators, followed official reserve procedures, and made sure the safari was arranged with a registered guide. His wife, Priya, and their 17-year-old daughter, Meera, joined them for the journey. By the second morning of the safari, the family had already settled comfortably into the experience. The monsoon forest felt dense, but earlier calm sightings made Kiran confident. His academic knowledge of tigers increased his comfort despite subtle warning signs. The open-sided Jeep required strict seating near predators, but Kiran repeatedly stood to photograph over the roofline. Each time nothing happened, his confidence grew, making the risky behavior feel increasingly normal and safe. I think confidence was slowly convincing him the rule didn't really matter. Late morning, the Jeep crept through a narrow forest trail, branches brushing the vehicle as the family scanned dense vegetation. Then the Jeep stopped suddenly. The guide had seen movement in the undergrowth to the left of the trail. At first, the family could barely make out the shape through the vegetation. Then, an enormous adult male tiger stepped silently from the greenery into partial view. The animal stood roughly 25 feet from the Jeep. For a moment, everything became completely still. The tiger was massive orange fur, darkened by moisture. Heavy shoulders rolling beneath striped muscle. Its eyes fixed directly on the vehicle, but its posture was calm. It was not growling or crouching aggressively. Close-range sightings of tigers near safari vehicles were not uncommon, though most ended without incident. The guide quietly instructed everyone to remain seated and still. To me, that's the moment the guide understood the risk better than anyone else in the vehicle. But Kiran was already lifting his camera. Wanting a clearer shot above the side railing, he slowly rose from his seat. There was a half-second of frozen silence before the guide shouted at him to sit down. When Kiran rose above the Jeep's profile, the tiger's attention shifted sharply toward the sudden vertical movement. It was not only the height change, the movement itself against the jungle backdrop altered what the animal had been watching. The tiger's focus tightened. Its posture changed almost imperceptibly at first, then it moved. The tiger surged forward in a rapid burst from the edge of the trail. It covered the distance before most people inside the Jeep had fully processed that it had started moving at all. There was no extended charge, no buildup. The animal simply reacted and closed the gap. The strike caught Kiran across the chest and upper arm with enormous force. He was knocked sideways instantly, his upper body slamming against the opposite railing before he toppled over the side and hit the muddy trail below. The camera struck the floor of the Jeep. Priya screamed. Devraj lunged toward the railing while the guide reached beneath the front seat for a noise deterrent. Some safari guides carried for emergencies a bundle of firecrackers. The sharp cracking blasts echoed through the forest in rapid succession. The tiger flinched back from the noise. For a brief moment, it hesitated near the edge of the trail where Kiran had fallen. The guide fired another burst. The animal turned, paused once more, and then disappeared back into the undergrowth in seconds. The forest went quiet again except for Priya's voice and the sound of the idling engine. Kiran was still on the ground beside the Jeep. The guide immediately radioed reserve staff while Devraj climbed down to reach his son. Emergency teams arrived quickly and transported Kiran to medical facilities, but the injuries from the impact and the strike itself were severe. He died before the day was over. The post-incident investigation found that the guide had followed reserve protocol correctly throughout the encounter. Officials confirmed that the tiger's reaction began only after Kiran stood above the vehicle railing despite repeated safety instructions to remain seated. The incident was formally categorized as a fatality resulting from violation of established safari safety guidelines. Kiran understood tiger behavior academically, but facing a fully grown tiger nearby turned theoretical knowledge into immediate physical danger within seconds. While India's tiger reserve exposed safari vulnerability, Western Zimbabwe revealed an animal capable of crushing vehicles instantly. On the 14th of June 2017, the boundary road running along the Hwange Wildlife Corridor in western Zimbabwe looked like any other rural route at the end of the dry season. Dust covered the dry roadside as villagers, workers, and traders traveled the familiar road daily, unaware the dangerous encounter waiting ahead would turn violent. Sibusiso Ncube, 43, had traveled that road for years. The calm mathematics teacher knew the road well, but elephants had recently begun appearing near it far more frequently during the dry season. Before June 14th, shrinking water sources pushed animals toward roads, increasing elephant encounters, though driver warnings rarely reached nearby communities. That evening, Sibusiso was driving home from visiting relatives with his wife Tendai, 38, and their 2 children, seated in the back cab of the pickup truck. As sunset neared, the vehicle entered a quiet wildlife corridor stretch, moving slowly over rough dirt roads lined with dry brush. Then Sibusiso rounded a long, shallow curve and immediately hit the brakes. An elephant stood directly in the middle of the road. It was a massive adult bull, completely alone. At first, the animal simply stood, facing partly sideways across the road, blocking the entire path forward. The truck rolled to a stop several yards away, while dust drifted around the tires. Inside the cab, the family waited quietly. Sibusiso had seen elephants before. Most roadside encounters ended with the animal eventually moving away on its own. But after several moments, Tendai began noticing something unusual about this bull. Dark streaks of thick fluid ran down the sides of the elephant's face from openings between the eyes and ears. Even from inside the vehicle, the animal looked tense and restless. Its head shifted slowly while its ears twitched outward. Sibusiso sounded the horn. The sharp noise echoed down the empty road. The elephant did not move. To me, that was already a warning sign. It did not step aside. It did not retreat into the bush. It simply remained standing in place, staring toward the truck. After waiting another moment, Sibusiso sounded the horn again, longer this time. Still, nothing changed. The elephant remained fixed in the roadway. Inside the cab, the atmosphere slowly shifted from inconvenience to unease. Tendai later said, "The silence after the horn felt wrong." The animal's lack of reaction made the road suddenly feel much smaller. Sibusiso watched the elephant, likely thinking it could be moved away like in local practice, despite having no wildlife training or experience. Finally, he opened the driver's door. Tendai immediately became nervous. Despite warnings, Sibusiso stepped from the truck, believing he could scare the elephant away safely, but the bull reacted aggressively the moment he touched ground. Its ears spread wide from the sides of its head. Its trunk curled upward slightly while its massive head lifted high. Tendai later said the entire animal seemed to transform in seconds from stillness into aggression. Then it charged. The elephant exploded forward with terrifying speed. The ground shook beneath the impact of its movement as the bull thundered down the road directly toward Sibusiso. The distance between them vanished almost instantly. Sibusiso turned back toward the truck, but there was no time. The elephant slammed into him with enormous force only seconds after beginning the charge. Tendai screamed as the impact threw Sibusiso violently beside the vehicle. But the attack did not stop there. The bull immediately redirected its aggression toward the pickup truck itself. The elephant crashed headfirst into the side of the cab with enough force to rock the entire vehicle sideways. The metal frame groaned loudly while the children screamed inside. Tendai grabbed the children and pulled them low beneath the windows as the elephant struck again. Its forehead smashed into the truck a second time while its front legs pushed against the side paneling. Dust exploded into the air around the vehicle as the elephant thrashed beside the road, snorting loudly. Inside the cab, the family could hear the heavy impacts against the metal only inches away. For several terrifying moments, the elephant continued battering the truck before finally stopping. Then, almost as suddenly as the violence began, the bull turned away from the road and disappeared back into the surrounding bush. The road fell silent again, except for the sound of the engine still running. Tendai remained inside the vehicle with the children until another passing vehicle arrived roughly 25 minutes later. Emergency services were contacted from the nearest town, but Sibusiso had died beside the truck. Investigators confirmed the elephant was in must, with increased aggression, while elephant activity had risen that season without formal warnings to locals. Sibusiso's decision seemed reasonable, but the elephant already showed dangerous aggression signs long before he stepped outside the truck. While the corridor road of western Zimbabwe had taken Sibusiso in Kube in the span of a single minute, the mountains of northwestern Wyoming would show that the danger does not always wait for an open road or a visible animal. Sometimes it arrives at a parked vehicle. On the 23rd of August 2013, the Calloway family drove deep into the mountains of northwestern Wyoming toward a remote backcountry trailhead, nearly 12 miles from the nearest paved highway. The remote Wyoming trailhead became silent at night as the family slept inside their locked SUV, believing it offered more protection than a tent, though they knew it wasn't foolproof. Merritt Calloway, 48, had spent most of his life in mountain terrain. He coached high school athletics in Montana, but outside work he hunted, hiked, and camped regularly. His family trusted his judgment outdoors because he was careful and organized. He carried bear spray within reach of the driver's seat and had already talked with his family about Grizzly's safety before the trip. That night, Merritt, his wife Sandra, and their 2 teenage children settled into the SUV after dark. The plan was simple: sleep at the trailhead, wake before sunrise, and begin hiking in the morning. The vehicle was locked. Their supplies were packed carefully in the cargo area. Food had been stored inside a hard cooler in the back of the SUV, something many outdoor travelers did routinely while sleeping in vehicles. At first, the night passed quietly. The family eventually fell asleep beneath the cold mountain air outside while the forest remained dark and still around the parking area. Sometime later, something changed. Sandra would later say she woke suddenly to a strange movement rocking the SUV. At first, she did not fully understand what she was feeling. The vehicle shifted slightly again, as if someone outside had pushed against it. Then came a scraping sound along the rear side panel. Merritt woke up almost immediately afterward. For several seconds, the family stayed completely still inside the dark vehicle, listening. Another heavy impact hit the SUV. This time the entire frame shook hard enough to rattle the windows. Outside, something large moved around the vehicle. I've always found persistent animal behavior more worrying than sudden aggression. Sandra later remembered hearing deep breathing and scratching sounds near the cargo area. The noise circled slowly around the SUV while claws scraped against metal near the rear wheel well. A grizzly bear had been working the vehicle before they woke, sniffing, circling, and testing the panels repeatedly. Investigators later reconstructed the timeline based on claw marks, dent depth, and disturbed soil patterns around the tires, evidence of sustained, persistent investigation rather than a brief passing encounter. Whatever had drawn the animal, it had not left. Inside the SUV, the family sat in near darkness, listening to the animal move around them. The vehicle rocked again. A teenager asked what was happening as Merritt strained to see through dark windows, with no lights outside, only shifting shadows. Then came another loud impact near the driver's side door. At some point during those moments, Merritt made a decision investigators could never fully explain. He reached for the driver's side handle. The exact reason was never confirmed. In similar cases, investigators note panic, misjudgment of distance, or attempts to deter the animal, but what Merritt believed in those seconds remained unknown. The moment he pushed the door open, the bear was positioned immediately outside it. The movement itself was likely enough: the sudden shift of air, the widening gap, the change in what the animal had been pressing against. The grizzly reacted without hesitation. A massive paw drove through the opening with enormous force before Merritt could pull the door back shut. The impact flung the door wide and threw Merritt sideways across the front seat. What followed happened in a matter of seconds. The bear struck at the open doorway, its head driving through the gap as Merritt tried to push back against it. The confined space offered almost no room to maneuver. He sustained severe injuries to his head and upper body within the first moments of contact, while the vehicle shook from the force of the animal against the frame. Sandra reached across the center console and found the horn. When it blared into the night, the sound cut sharply across the empty trailhead and through the surrounding trees. The horn caused the bear to hesitate and step back briefly from the door. It did not leave immediately. For a short time, it remained near the parking area, moving through the dark around the vehicle before eventually disappearing into the tree line south of the trailhead. Inside the SUV, the family was left in near darkness with Merritt critically injured in the driver's seat. An emergency call was placed from the trailhead, but help was far away. Forest Service responders required roughly 50 minutes to reach the remote location. Merritt Calloway died from his injuries before evacuation could be completed. Investigators concluded food inside the SUV likely drew the grizzly in, while opening the driver's door removed the one barrier that had kept the family protected through the night. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked today's video, go ahead and click that like button. Make sure you subscribe. We'll see you next time.